Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again, coming at you with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We're on chapter 10 of the War of the Ancients' second book, The Demon Soul. Servers are down in the real world of WoW as they're getting ready for cross-faction play. So, since I know you got nothing better else to do, why don't you stay a while and listen to chapter 10. This is insufferable, Lord Stareye said, removing a pinch of powder from his pouch and sniffing it into one nostril. A perfect opportunity wasted, Katalos. Perhaps Desdal, perhaps not. Still, it's done and must be looked past now. The two nobles stood in Lord Ravencrest's tent with several other aristocratic officers discussing a plan of action now that the rout had been stopped. Desdal Stareye, however, was convinced that Krasus had been premature in deciding that the host had to come to a halt just when they had their enemy on the run. Stareye felt certain that the Night Elves could have advanced all the way to Suramar unhindered if they had just listened to him, an opinion he had voiced more than once since Krasus and the others had joined the group. The soldiers have fought valiantly, the mage responded politely, but they are of flesh and blood and are flagging. They must have this rest. Food, too, grunted Brox, who had accompanied the spellcasters. The Night Elves had clearly not desired the orc's company, but as Ravencrest had not commanded him to be put out, no one, not even Stareye, would make an objection to his presence. Yes, there is that, the Master of Black Rockhold agreed. The soldiers and refugees are eating and bedding down, and that's the end of it. Now then, we move on to what must happen next. Zinajara, certainly, piped up Lord Stareye. Queen Ajara must be saved. The other nobles echoed his sentiments. Krasus frowned, but said nothing. He and the others had discussed the matter before their arrival, and all had agreed that the Night Elves would cling to the belief that their monarch was a prisoner of the demons. Since Zinajari was also the access point by which the Burning Legion entered Kalimdor, it seemed futile to argue for any other course of action. For one reason or another, the capital had to be taken. Krasus did not think, however, that Malfurion's people could do it alone. Ignoring protocol, he stepped up and demanded, My Lord Ravencrest, I must speak again on a subject I know you wish not to hear, but that cannot be avoided. Ravencrest accepted a goblet of wine poured by Lord Stareye. Even in the midst of crisis, the hierarchy of the Night Elves insisted on some benefits. You'd be referring to communications with dwarves and such? Next to him, Stareye scoffed. Similar expressions graced the features of most of the other nobles. Despite that it was clear that this would be a repeat of all his previous defeats, the mage persisted. At this moment, the dwarves, Tauren, and other races are surely fighting their own struggles against the Burning Legion. Separately, there is some small chance that you will survive, but a concerted effort by all could see Zinajari taken with a loss of far fewer lives. Tauren and Zinajari, blurted one noble. How barbaric. They'd rather have the demons there? Muttered Ronan to Malfurion. You wouldn't understand, the druid replied morosely. No, I wouldn't. The bearded commander downed his wine, then handed the goblet back to Lord Stareye. He eyed the mage as one would a respected, albeit misguided, elder. Master Krasus, your contributions to our strategy have been well appreciated. Your knowledge of your craft exceeds that of any of our sorcerers. In the guidance of the arts, I heartily turn to you for suggestions. Ravencrest's frown deepened. However, when it comes to other matters, I must remind you that you aren't one of us. You don't understand basic truths. Even if I did something as mad as summon the dwarves in Tauren to our aid, do you think honestly they would come? They distrust us as much as we do them. For that matter, even if they would join us, do you expect our soldiers to fight alongside? The dwarves are more likely to turn on us, interjected Stareye. Their avarice is well documented. They would rob us and then scurry back to their holes. Another officer added, and the Tauren would spend as much time fighting with one another. They are beasts more than intelligent creatures. Their chaos would spill over into our fighters, cause such disarray that we would be easily wiped out by the demons. I'd like to read some of these books that get into the old Tauren and races. I love the Taurens. Lord Ravencrest agreed. You see, Master Krasus, we'd be inviting not only bedlam into our midst, but certain destruction. We may yet face that by going on alone. That this particular discussion is at an end, good wizard, and I must respectfully order that you do not bring it up again. The two stared at each other for several seconds, and it was Ravencrest who glanced away first. Despite that small victory, though, Krasus acquiesced. "Forgive me for overstepping my bounds," he said. "We are about to discuss supplies and logistics, Master Krasus. There really is no need for the presence of any spellcaster during this session, save Illidan, who serves me directly. I would suggest that you and the others get some much-needed rest yourselves. Your skills we welcome when we advance again." Krasus bowed politely, saying nothing more. With the others following, he calmly glided out of the tent. But once out of earshot of those within, the pale mage commented bitterly, "Their short-sightedness will put a tragic end to this struggle. Alliance with the other races is the key to victory." "They won't accept them," Malfurion insisted. "My people will never fight alongside such." "They accepted Corielstra's readily enough," countered Ronan. "There are few who can deny a dragon, Master Ronan." "Too true," muttered Krasus, looking thoughtful. "Ronan, I must go find them." "Find who?" "The dragons, of course." Brock snorted and Malfurion looked startled. The druid knew that Krasus had a link with Corielstra's, but even now he did not understand the full truth. "The dragons, Master Krasus, but they're a force unto themselves. How can you possibly think to do so?" "I have my methods, but to accomplish the fact also requires swift transportation. The Nightsabers will never do for that. I need something that can fly." "Like a dragon?" Ronan asked wryly. "Something smaller will suffice, my friend." To the surprise of the others, it was Malfurion who suddenly came up with a suggestion. "There are woods not far from here. Perhaps I can contact Cenarius. He may have a solution." From Krasus' expression, this was not entirely satisfying, but no one could come up with anything better. He finally nodded, saying, "We shall have to depart as soon as possible then. Captain Shadowsong will otherwise either seek to detain us or, even worse, follow with his troops behind us. I fear that will draw both the Burning Legion and the Night Elves to our mission." Jared and the rest of the bodyguard had been given time to recuperate. No one thought the wizards in physical danger amidst the host, and the soldiers could hardly defend against any magical assault better than their charges. Come the march, the bodyguard would immediately resume its duties, of course, but by then Krasus hoped to be on his way. "Do you really think this necessary?" asked the red-tressed wizard. "I go for two reasons, Ronan. The first is that of which we speak. The dragons can turn the tide. As for the second reason, that is more personal. I go to see why I sense only silence from them. That should not be so, as you understand. I need to discover the truth." He received no more objections. Lord Ravencrest intended for the Night Elves to march at first dark, and Krasus had to be far from here before he was discovered missing. Ronan nodded. "What about Brox and me?" "If our druid friend here can gain me transportation, as he says, he will be able to return well before nightfall. In the meantime, you and Brox must try to stay from the sight of Lord Ravencrest. He may ask about us. He will be furious enough when he discovers I have left." "Maybe, maybe not. At least no one will be questioning his decisions out loud." Ignoring the human's jest, Krasus turned to Malfurion. "We must go. If we take a pair of Nightsabers toward the area of the refugees, the soldiers will not bother with us much. We can then come around and head toward the woods." He let out a slight hiss. "And then we must pray that your patron will come to our aid." They quickly left the others, following the elder mage's suggestion as to their course. Soldiers eyed them with some suspicion and curiosity. But as the pair were not heading toward the front, the looks did not last long. Malfurion was still uncomfortable with Krasus' mission, but did not question the conjurer. He respected the latter's wisdom and knew that Krasus understood the dragons better than anyone he had ever met. Often he even seemed almost one of them. Surely somewhere in his past Krasus had enjoyed the unique experience of having dwelled among the ancient creatures for some period of time. What other explanation could there be for his link to the Leviathans? I wonder if when they go, Hakar is going to get them. It took nearly 3 hours, but they finally entered the woods. The comfort Malfurion felt the last time he had entered such a place did not touch him now. This forest had experienced the taint of the Legion, and the marks remained. If not for the sudden turnaround by the defenders, it very well would have been reduced to ruin already. Despite the imminent threat, life still abounded here. Birds sang, and the druid could sense the trees, sending ahead word of the new intruders. The rustling grew particularly fierce whenever Krasus neared, almost as if the forest too could sense his differences. They did, of course, also welcome the Night Elf, clearly noting his aura and the obvious blessing of Cenarius. But of the demigod the druid sensed nothing. Cenarius had many tasks at hand, foremost trying to stir his counterparts to an active and organized defense of their world. How then could Malfurion hope that the woodland deity would have time to respond to his call? This land has suffered much already, his companion uttered. I can taste the evil that has been here. So do I. Krasus, I don't know if Cenarius will hear me here after all. I can but ask you to attempt to reach him, Malfurion. If you fail, I will not hold it against you. I will then have to make do with the lightsaber, although that will slow my journey greatly. They reached a spot deep in the woods where the druid sensed a bit more tranquility. He informed Krasus of this, and the pair dismounted. Shall I leave you alone? Asked the mage. If Cenarius chooses to come, he will do so even if you are with me, Master Krasus. Malfurion found a seat among the soft, wild grass. Krasus stepped respectfully to one side so as not to disturb the druid. Closing his eyes, Malfurion focused. He reached out first to the trees, the plants, and other life, seeking from them any hint of the demigod's recent presence. If Cenarius had been here, he would soon know, but the forest offered no hints of the deity. Frustrated, the druid considered his other options. Unfortunately, only the Emerald Dream truly offered him a certain way of immediately contacting his Shondo. It was as he had feared. Exhaling, Malfurion concentrated on the ethereal realm. He did not have to enter it completely, only touch upon its edges. Then he could send out his thoughts to Cenarius. Even interacting that much with it bothered Malfurion, but it had to be done. He felt himself beginning to separate from his mortal shell. However, instead of allowing the transition to complete, the druid held himself midway. Doing so proved more of a strain than he had thought, but Malfurion did not plan to stay in such a state long. He imagined Cenarius as he knew him, using that to help create a link. His concentration was suddenly jarred by a voice in his ear. Malfurion, we are not alone. The rapid retreat back into his body shook the druid. Momentarily stunned, he could do nothing else save open his eyes, in time to see a fell beast charging toward him. Someone muttered words of power, and the hideous hound shriveled within itself. The beast curled and twisted, swiftly becoming a grotesque mangled pile of bone and sinew. Krasus grabbed Malfurion by the arms, lifting him with startling strength. The elder mage asked, Can you defend yourself yet? The druid had no time to respond, for suddenly the woods came alive with not only the demonic hounds, but horned bestial Felguard. The two spellcasters were outnumbered at least 10-1. Their mounts, bound to one tree, snarled and pulled at their tethers, but could not free themselves. The demons, however, ignored the panthers, their targets clearly being the mage and the druid. Drawing an invisible line around them, Krasus uttered another short spell. Crystalline spikes thrust up from the ground, growing to the height of a night elf. 3 Felguard became impaled on the spikes. A fell beast howled as another spike tore off part of its muzzle. Krasus' swift action gave Malfurion time to think. He looked to the trees nearest the oncoming demons and asked of their aid. Thick foliage-covered branches stretched out and snagged 4 of the monstrous warriors. They pulled the demons high, dragging them from sight. Malfurion could not see what happened to the victims, but he noted well that they did not reappear. Other trees merely stuck their branches out, timing their appearance to the legion's charge. One fell beast tumbled helplessly as it fell over a branch. Another was even less fortunate, its neck cracking when it collided with the unexpected obstruction. Yet still the demons swarmed them, especially the hounds. They seemed to leer as they approached, the notion of 2 trapped spellcasters no doubt stirring their hunger. Despite the effectiveness of Malfurion's attack, the demons seemed to fear Krasus more, and with good reason. Possessing knowledge of his craft far greater than the night elves of his own, the mage cast with both speed and extreme ruthlessness. It was a far cry from the sickly figure he had been when they first had met. True, Krasus appeared under immense strain even now, but he in no way faltered because of it. A crack like thunder echoed throughout the forest. Krasus grasped at his throat, where a thin, blazing tentacle now wrapped around it, tightening like a noose. The mage was pulled back off his feet and dragged toward the very spikes he had created. Daring a glance over his shoulder, the night elf beheld a sight nearly as frightening as Archimond. A huge skeletal knight, his head a horned skull with flames for eyes, using a fearsome whip to drag Krasus to his doom. The newcomer stood taller than the other demons, and from the way they parted for him, Malfurion guessed that this was their leader. Seizing a few blades of grass, the druid tossed them toward the sinister lash. The grass blades spun swiftly as they flew, then sliced away at the whip like well-honed knives until at last one cut completely through. Krasus gasped as the end of the lash separated. He fell to his knees, trying to unbind what remained. The demon stumbled a few steps back, but managed to sustain his balance. He drew back the whip and prepared to use its still formidable length against the druid. Surrounded by demons, his companion incapacitated, Malfurion did not hold much hope for his chances of survival. He and Krasus had not only left themselves open to the demonic assassins ever trailing them, but this time their leader had come to ensure there would be no escape. No Jared would come to their aid. Only Ronan and Brox knew of their departure, and both assumed that the pair would be all right. How misguided they had all been. To his surprise, though, the demon did not immediately strike. Again, Instead, he hissed it to Malfurion.
Surrender, creature, and you will be spared. I promise this in the name of my most honored master, Sargeras. It is your only hope of survival.
Krasus coughed, trying to clear his throat. Surrendering to the Burning Legion is a fate far worse than the most terrible death. We must fight, even if we are destined to lose, Malfurion. Grim memories of his brief encounter with Archimond made the Night Elf think the very same thing. He could just imagine what the demons would do with prisoners, especially those who had been instrumental in foiling their plans so far. We'll never surrender. His fiery orbs flickered angrily, and the demon snapped his whip 4 times. Lightning flashed as the lash struck the earth. Huge shapes suddenly formed before the demon. With each snap, a fiendish hound materialized.
Then my pets will feed upon you, spellcasters.
Krasus steadied himself, then turned to gaze at the lead demon. His eyes narrowed dangerously. But the skeletal knight was prepared for his attack. He swung the whip around and around, creating a haze. The haze sparkled suddenly, as if something exploded against it. The Night Elf bit back an epithet. Their adversary had easily dealt with what should have been a powerful spell.
It is as I feared, Krasus muttered. It is the Hound Master. Hakar.
Malfurion would have liked to ask him what he knew of the demon, but at that moment the other monsters resumed their charge. The spikes provided some defense, but the demons now began tearing, clawing, and chopping them apart. In the background their leader laughed, a sound like 100 angry serpents. Yet just as the first of the Felguard tore through and started for the pair, warriors astride lightsabers charged into the battle from all sides, their beasts mauling some of the demons before the latter realized they were under assault. As the newcomers attacked, they sang. Malfurion gaped at them, only belatedly realizing that they were not the soldiers of Jared's shadow song. Their armor was more silver, and he looked twice, shaped for more feminine figures. The song he heard was in praise of the Night Warrior, the fearsome battle incarnation of the Mother Moon. The Sisterhood of Elune had come to their rescue. And I was reading the timeline, and they said that that's one thing that Tyrande does is she makes the, after all this goes down, she makes the Sisterhood of Elune the leaders, and she becomes like a Night Warrior. For the first time, Malfurion saw the quiet, gentle priestesses in their wartime roles. Many carried long, curved swords, while others wielded short lances with points on both ends. A few even had bows no longer than their forearms, from which they swiftly shot dart after dart. The effect on the demons was immediate. Fell beasts dropped, riddled. A priestess swung her blade with the ease of a soldier, decapitating a horned warrior. 2 night sabers dropped upon another hound, slashing it repeatedly from both sides until all that remained was a bloody carcass. And among the fearsome figures now wreaking havoc on the Burning Legion, he saw Tyrande. Before he could call to her, a demon thrust at him. The towering Felguard would have cut through the druid if not for his swift reflexes. The Night Elf rolled out of range, then cast a spell. The ground beneath his adversary's feet turned into a wet, sandy mixture. The Felguard sank in up to his waist, but managed to keep from dropping any farther. He clawed at the edge with his free hand, trying to pull himself free. Malfurion gave him no such opportunity. He kicked the blade out of the demon's hand, then ran after it. The monstrous warrior twisted about, trying to snare his legs. Malfurion slipped, one foot caught by his foe. He seized the hilt of the sword just as the demon dragged him to the quicksand. Swinging with all his might, the druid buried the blade in the Felguard's head. As the demon sank slowly into the mire, Malfurion saw that not all was going well. The Sisterhood had the upper hand, but more than one of them faced imminent threat. Even as he straightened, one priestess was torn from the saddle by a fell beast who bit through her neck as easily as through silk. Another sister tumbled to the ground as a demon drove his weapon through the open jaws of a lightsaber, the other end of the blade bursting out between the cat's shoulder blades. A second warrior dispatched the priestess a moment later. But what terrified Malfurion most was when his gaze fixed upon Tyrande once more. Locked in combat with one of the Felguard, she failed to notice the Houndmaster and his whip. The lash should have wrapped around her throat, but a chance shift by her mount instead had it bind her arms to his sides. The skeletal knight tugged hard, pulling Tyrande off her panther as if her armored form weighed nothing. "No!" cried Malfurion, starting after her. Krasus, in the midst of casting a spell, tried to grab his arm.
"Druid, you're safer here."
But the Night Elf cared only about Tyrande. His training all but forgotten, he angled his way through the battle. When he got near enough, he leapt, but not for his childhood friend. The immense form of the Houndmaster resisted Malfurion's weight as he struck the demon, but it did cause the hideous figure to lose his concentration. The whip loosened its grip on the priestess, letting her land softly on the earth.
"Fool!"
spat the Houndmaster, grabbing the druid by his shoulder.
"I am Hakar, and you are nothing."
He did not see the dagger that Malfurion pulled from his belt. The small blade sank into the demon's arm at the place where the elbow joint offered some vulnerability. With a howl, Hakar dropped his quarry. He pulled the dagger free. The sharp blade covered in the thick ooze that was the demon's blood. However, instead of using the dagger on Malfurion, the Houndmaster tossed it aside and retrieved his fallen whip. He stalked toward the rising druid, arm already raised.
"His orders are to keep you alive, if possible. I think it will not be possible, though."
Hakar struck. Malfurion clamored in pain as lightning flared all over his body. He felt as if he were being burned alive. However, a part of him remained calm throughout his agony. It drew upon Cenarius' teachings, pulling Malfurion away from his pain. The anguish of the whip faded into nothing. The Houndmaster struck him a second and third time, but it might as well have been a slight breeze for all the druid felt it. Malfurion understood that the punishment would eventually ravage his body, regardless of the lack of pain. His Shando's teachings, but gave him the chance to do what he could to defend himself, if at all possible.
"I will keep you just barely alive. Perhaps,"
mocked Hakar, hitting him again.
"all he seeks is enough life to torture. There will be just that."
The fearsome giant raised his whip again. Malfurion's gaze twisted up to the heavens. The cloud cover offered him his best hope, and the Houndmaster ironically had aided in that choice. The wind assisted him first, stirring the clouds to motion. They disliked being so disturbed, and in their anger quickly grew black. Although it went against his nature, Malfurion fed their rage, then played on their vanity. There was one here who commanded lightning of his own, and flaunted it. Hakar took his stillness for surrender. Eyes blazing, the Houndmaster pulled his arm back.
"One more stroke, I think. One more stroke."
The clouds rumbled, shook. Lightning shot down, not one but two bolts that hit the huge demon dead on. Hakar let out a roar of pain that made every bone in Malfurion's body shiver. The Houndmaster stood bathed in brilliant light, his arms outstretched as if he sought to embrace that which destroyed him. The whip, already burnt black, fell from his trembling grasp. All around the scene of the battle, the fell beasts abruptly paused in their struggles and howled mournfully. At last, the heavenly illumination faded away, and the ashy corpse of the demon lord dropped limply to the grass. The monstrous hounds howled once more, then their bodies glowed as they had when first summoned. As one, the fell beasts vanished, their cries still resounding. Bereft of both Hakar and his pets, the few remaining demons put up little resistance against the priestesses and Krasus. As the last fell slain, Malfurion staggered over to Tyrande. She sat on the ground, still half stunned. When she saw him, however, Tyrande's face broke out into a wonderful smile that made Malfurion forget his own pain. "Tyrande, this miracle is yours." "No miracle, Malfurion. One who I healed told me of a fell beast behind our lines. He also described hearing what I believed was the demon commanding them." She gazed briefly at what remained of Hakar. "I went to warn you and the others, only to find that Krasus and you had departed for here. Perhaps it was a loon speaking to me, but I felt certain that you were at risk." "So you turned to the Sisterhood. I've seen few soldiers who fight better." She gave him another smile, this one tired but pleased. "There's much about the temple that outsiders do not understand." Her expression grew more serious. "Are you all right?" "I am, but I fear that Krasus and I came here for no good reason. I'd hoped to contact Cenarius so that the wizard might be able to gain some sort of mount that could carry him to the land of dragons." Ronan and Brox hinted at much, but I could scarcely believe. Does he truly dream that he can meet with them? The druid glanced over at Krasus, who had been aided in rising by two of the sisters. Like so many others, they treated him with reverence, even though they were not quite certain why. The mage strode toward where the Houndmaster lay, his expression perturbed. "You see him. You sense something within him, Tyrande. I think he can do it, if somehow he reaches their realm. But unless a dragon itself carries him there, how else can he make the journey in good time? I don't know. A sudden shadow covered the pair. Malfurion looked up and his hopeless expression changed to one of wonder. They circled the party thrice before finally ascending in an area away from the nearest nightsaber. The cats hissed but did not otherwise attempt to attack the new arrivals, perhaps because they themselves were not sure what to make of them. Are they griffins? With their vast, feathered wings and raven-like heads, they resembled jet-black griffins at first sight. Then even the forelimbs were scaled and taloned like those of the aforementioned creature. Beyond that, however, they were entirely different animals. Instead of leonine torsos and hindquarters, these two had equine forms, even down to the thick tails. Hippogriffs, declared the knowledgeable Krasus, his disturbed expression shifting to one of intense satisfaction. Swift and certain flyers. He could not have chosen better, your Cenarius. Tyrande did not look so thrilled. But there are two of them. The mage and Malfurion studied each other, both recognizing why Cenarius would send more than one mount. I'm to go with Krasus, it seems, answered the druid. Seizing him by the arm, Tyrande snapped, No, Malfurion, not there! I see the sense of the Forest Lord's decision, Krasus interjected. The druid will be better able to guide the hippogriffs, and his link to Cenarius will give him good standing with the Queen of the Reds, Alexstrasza, she who is life. The priestess's eyes pleaded with him, but Malfurion had to agree. He's right. I have to go with him. Forgive me, Tyrande. On impulse, the druid hugged her. Tyrande hesitated, then returned the brief hug. Malfurion gazed down at her and added, I fear you might have to help Ronan and Brox explain our absence. Will you do that for me? She finally surrendered to the inevitable. Of course I will. You should know me that well. The hippogriffs squawked, as if impatient to be on their way. Krasus obliged them by quickly mounting. Malfurion climbed aboard the second one, eyes still on Tyrande. Seizing his wrist, she suddenly started whispering. It took a moment for the two riders to realize that Tyrande was giving Malfurion a blessing from a loon. So it will last 60 minutes. It's not going to do him any good. Go safely, she finished quietly, and return the same way, for me. The druid swallowed, unable to say anything. Or they could return on dragons. Krasus ended the awkwardness of the situation by gently prodding his hippogriff in the ribs with his heels. The beast squawked again, then turned in preparation for flight. Malfurion's mount instinctively followed suit. Farewell and thank you, Tyrande, he called. I'll be back soon enough. I will hold you to that, Mal. He smiled at her use of his childhood nickname, then had to cling on tight as the hippogriff charged into the air after its mate. The journey will be long, shouted Krasus, but not nearly so long, thanks to the demigod's gift. Malfurion nodded, not entirely paying attention. His gaze remained on the shrinking figure below. He watched her watch him in turn until finally he could no longer see her at all. And even then he watched more, at that instant knowing in his heart that Tyrande did exactly the same. So, that was a good chapter for the heroes. They survived an attack. They got their answer from Cenarius and got them what they wanted to do, which is sending them off to go talk to the dragons, although they're walking into a bad situation there. And they defeated Hakar, so the first leader to arrive. So now, I'm telling you, they keep tying him into serpent-like stuff, even though they describe him as a skeleton knight. And the only Hakar I can think of is in The Other Side, and it's that serpent boss. There must be other stuff that I'm not remembering, because this came out long before Shadowlands. And people in Shadowlands could come from anywhere because they're dead. We even have a Jahara there. All right, guys, another episode in the pipes, 5x5. Thank you for listening. Hopefully the servers are back up. See you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.